So let me start by asking the first question. How many of you know anything about smarter cities? A few of you, okay. For those of you who don't know,
I saw you on video just a few days ago.
oh, expert, okay. So I'm not going to talk anything about the video, so hopefully. So Smarter Cities for us started back in 2008 when we really started launching our program of Smarter Planet. And it goes back to this particular thing, which is a lump of technology. Anybody know what this technology is? Sorry? Correct. The first transistor, which was created in? San Francisco. No, it's Bell Labs in New Jersey, 1954. So this thing, just to give you a feel, is about that high. It's about 5 centimeters in total, and the transistor forms the core fabric of what makes a computer work. Right? So it takes a number of transistors to make a computer. You can make a decent 4-bit computer with a few thousand transistors if you know how. So the next question then is, and the guys that were with me earlier can't answer this question. How many transistors do you think there existed in 2010? Rough feel. Okay, let's make it easier. How many transistors per human? Per person?
10 billion.
10 billion? Per person? 10 billion. Any advances on 10 billion? Okay, you're right. 1 billion. So 1 billion transistors to every human alive in 2010. Right. There's a lot more than that now. And this is really where our work started, because the Academy had created a report saying we are going to enter the instrumented planet because we can instrument almost anything. And the statistic they used was 1 billion transistors to every human alive. In fact, by 2010, we were pretty close to the point where you could create a sensor which you could put on every single grain of rice and monitor its progress through its life. Right? And that's kind of where we're at. Okay? And so, as you can imagine, when the team presented this to our senior execs, they said, "Oh, very interesting, but so what? Yeah, so you can get all this information, what are you going to do with it?" And really, the challenge is understanding what that information tells you. What this graphic starts to say is, you can instrument anything, you can bring that information together with everything else that we know, and you can start to make smarter decisions. Okay, so the 3 I's of the IBM Smarter Planet story: instrument, interconnect, intelligence. That's what the heart of our program is. But that still doesn't help you understand that. So we then started to look at some of the work that we've done around the world. So we used RFIDs on apples in the Netherlands. Really? You say apples on Netherlands. What's that got to do with a Smarter Planet? Well, the average apple doesn't quite make it to the supermarket shelf. In fact, through the analysis, we found 50% of the apples actually perish in the journey from the farm to the supermarket shelf. Right? They don't actually get there. My favorite is a carrot, and the guys heard the carrot story earlier, but I'll do it again. The average carrot in the US travels 1,700 miles. It passes itself 3 times on that journey. Right. And that's because it's efficient, right? Because we've optimized different parts of the system. And the real challenge, of course, is not optimizing each part of the journey, it's optimizing the whole journey. And so Smarter Cities starts to form a real challenge for us, because we now start to rethink the journey of food and all that kind of things. At the same time, the world has become very real to us in ways that we hadn't imagined. So technology has made it possible for us to create movies like 2012 and The Day After Tomorrow. You go and watch that movie, and it's almost like you're there. Right? So at the same time, on the same screen, we see the disasters in Brisbane or smog in other cities, or we see the earthquake in Tokyo and in Japan and so on. And they are so real, they almost become surreal. They become virtual. They don't matter to us because they don't connect to us personally. Right? So at the same time as we can make these realistic images, the images that we also see are making us numb to some of the challenges that sit around us. And some of the guys were talking earlier about Lancaster and how Lancaster has a challenge with transportation. But we've become immune to it because we see it every day. And part of the challenge here is, how do we unearth the facts about the city itself and unearth the opportunity that we can apply technology to transform the city and make it more pertinent to what we need for ourselves. Right? And that's part of that journey that we took. So if you've gone and Googled some of our stuff, you'll see we've produced reports. One of our early reports was to say, if we look at the world at large, and we got a bunch of very smart economists to help us work through this, a lot of the systems that we depend on are inefficient in their own rights. And in fact, if we could eradicate all the inefficiencies in all the systems around the world, there is a potential of $40 trillion to be saved around the world every year. So that's a kind of business case, if you like, for making the world smarter. These are a few more bits of statistics. A third of the food produced in the UK is thrown away by consumers. The lifespan of an average UK citizen is reduced by about 8 months due to poor air quality. There's hundreds and hundreds of these stats. Right? And this is why we've got to try and make the world smarter. And I've got to pause. Does that make sense? Anybody got any questions? As I said before, if you don't have questions, I might as well send a video, right? So I'm hoping you're going to ask some questions. So cities can't work smarter. So the urbanization, we already know that 60% of the population lives in urban places. We're going to get more and more urbanization. You can by 2020, that number's going to increase. So cities can't work harder. Cities have got to work smarter. And this is where we've got to start thinking about what is a smarter city compared to a not so smart city. I don't want to say dumb city because that'd be derogatory, wouldn't it? But effectively a dumber city compared to a smarter city. Now we were very careful. We didn't call it smart cities because this isn't an end point, right? This is a journey. As you make every step on the journey, new information becomes available and you can see how you can make yourself even smarter. Okay, so this is a never-ending journey almost. And so thinking about the information that exists in the city itself, thinking about the information that you leave as individuals allows us to bring lots of information in to make much smarter decisions. And that's where the opportunity exists. So we think about a city as something, a smarter city, as something that has a unifying vision. At its core, it understands its value compared to other cities around the world. Okay? And that's often hard to uncover. And the guys earlier today started challenging me on, so what's the unique thing of Lancaster? And I couldn't answer the question because actually, even though I tried to prepare an answer to that question because I thought I might get the asked question, I couldn't form a particular view on that. And maybe that's a challenge that you all take on. How do we define what makes Lancaster unique? Right? And if I look at cities which are distinct in their own right, you know, I take for example Milan, and all of a sudden you think about the fashion and the personality that Milan has around fashion and so on. I think about cities like Stuttgart, and all of a sudden you think about the engineering excellence, your Mercedes and all that kind of stuff. You think about Coventry, and we won't go there. You get different kind of cities that have a different personality. And so at the core, the city has to have a vision, and the city leadership's role is to protect and grow that vision, because each city is competing for value against a global landscape. It's no longer competing locally. So no longer is Lancaster competing with Newcastle or any of the local cities. They're competing against a city in Shanghai or a city in the US or a city in Africa that hasn't even emerged yet. Right? So that's a core of it. At the core, once you understand the vision, then you can start to build what sits around that. And the thing that differentiates smarter cities from other cities are those that take the intellectual capability that exists in the university academic institutions and connect that directly with the commercialization, the core businesses that take that value and commercialize it. So you start to think about the things that sit around that. So innovating and thriving enterprises which take the core value from the city itself, efficient infrastructure that allows those city inhabitants, the citizens themselves, or businesses to be competitive in their own right. At the same time, you need to have prosperous communities that are active and thriving, so it becomes a place that people want to live, want to build, grow families, want to build homes and businesses and live, and also happy, safe, healthy citizens. That's kind of core of it. And around that, you start to see, well, okay, then the city itself has to have a set of services. It's got to have hospitals, it's got to have schools, universities, businesses. It's got power supply, all those kind of things. And you start to realize, actually, to make a smarter city, you have to understand all the interconnections between those, right? Because actually, it's the interconnections that allow us to understand the opportunity for optimization. Right? So the linkage between transportation and energy might be one that between electricity, there's no real linkage there. Well, the traffic lights, the system, all of a sudden you start to find the connections. And actually bringing those connections together and bringing them to the surface starts to identify the opportunities for transformation. And so this graphic starts to show some of the connections that we have between the different elements of the city itself. And so the idea of a smarter city is uncover these connections, uncover where the inefficiencies are, and use the information to help optimize at a systems level. Okay, so this is a systems problem, which requires a higher level of thinking than you might have in the first round. But of course, that creates great opportunity for us, right? Because there's great opportunities for entrepreneurship in this space, great opportunity for creating new jobs and new roles for us as well. Because ultimately, every city has 5 core challenges: how do I create new jobs? How do I create a thriving economy? How do I make sustainable use of the resources that I have? How do I cope with the aging population? And how do I have a safe and healthy set of communities? Because unless those 5 things exist, then the city itself gets challenged overall. That make sense? You're not asking questions, I'm getting worried. Okay, so let's look at what we've done. We've been at this now since about 2009. I've been involved in about 100 or so of these projects, so I know them quite well. Many of them are quite fascinating. I'll give you some of the examples in a minute. So these are some of the ones. Metering in Malta helps. It's quite fascinating. Water and electricity might not be seen as 2 systems that might want to collaborate together, but actually water is often the largest user of electricity at the city level. Movement of water is incredibly expensive in terms of energy usage. And so the work in Malta was around all of that kind of work. Taiwan around some of the smarter trains. The challenge in some of the Far East countries is they want to be able to not only know when the bus is going to arrive, they want to know how many people are queuing at the bus stop and how many seats are on the bus, so they know whether they're going to get a seat or not. Right? That's the kind of level of information that some of the citizens are expecting and demanding, because then they'll decide whether they're going to leave the home now and join the bus queue or come in 10 minutes' time to get the next bus. Right? Because that's what makes transportation at a public level more appropriate, right? Because you know you're going to get a seat in your car, right? But you don't know if you're going to get a seat on a bus. That might change the way in which things happen. So those are some of the projects. Let me look at a couple of other ones. This is one of my favourite ones. Stockholm, when they did the project with us on congestion charging. The original plan was reduce traffic into the city. You can see what the city was like before in terms of congestion charging. Post-congestion charging, you see the same time how much traffic was going through. And you thought, well, obviously people aren't going to pay for it. But the biggest challenge, of course, was the businesses in the city said, if you do this, you're going to destroy our businesses. People won't come and buy things from the city itself, from the businesses. What really happened was trade increased in the retail centre. Nobody expected it. We reduced personal injuries, obviously less traffic, less people get knocked over. We increased the quality of life and started reducing some of those kind of injuries that came out of that. But why did trade increase? It doesn't make sense. People aren't driving through the city. Why did that happen? Thoughts, questions, comments? Became more pleasant, maybe, right? Well, the block in the box just creates more queues usually, right? So the big difference here was number plate recognition, and the smart technology actually allowed us to do number plate recognition in storm and fogs and all those kind of things. So that's the smarter part of that. But the interesting thing here was actually people dwell more in the centre because they moved out of the cars into public transportation. Right? And because they dwell more in the city, they were walking past the retail centres and they would go and buy things. Rather than the car, because they were just driving past the city, people were actually walking around the city.
How long did it take to get from when people were driving to where people would live? Timescale?
I don't think we've actually got fully through the project. This is about 3 years old now. Some of these statistics were about 18 months after the start of the project. So we were seeing these kind of changes within that 18-month period. Right.
Are people just applying the sort of smarter city concept to specific problems? Most of those instances surely when if you're deploying your full city-wide every single project, that would in its own turn create its own level of complexity because
Yeah.
there's a huge amount of data it can generate. Has anybody taken that step yet, or is it just on the specific instance?
So most cities start with a specific issue. And if I go to a smarter city engagement, I look at three things. I look at what is the issue that binds different citizens together that'll have impact. So although it's a single issue, it will bring multiple aspects of the city together. And Malta, the water one, brought together the energy and transportation and lots of other pieces as well. So you know, the second thing is you can't make change without investment. So you've got to be clear on where the investment's going to come from. And unless you've got the investment plans in place, there's no point engaging. Right? And then the third thing, which is quite surprising, is you need to have an inspiring leader. Unless you've got an individual who has the charisma and capability to bring together all the different constituents around that problem, you can't make change happen. Right? And there, if I go and look at the sort of 2,000 studies that we've had, not all of them have been successful. If I look at the ones that haven't been successful, one of those three things are missing. But usually it starts off with one issue. But it is often an issue that spans multiple aspects of the city. And it's often one that's very difficult to tackle without bringing the whole group together. Yeah. Question. Was somebody else has a question? Yeah, sorry.
Was this purely down to congestion charging, or was there investment?
It was the latter. Right. You couldn't do this just by congestion charging because if you've got a poor, shall I say, public transportation, you're just going to cause unrest. So they had, before they put the congestion charge in place, they upgraded the buses themselves, increased the bus timetables, looked at trams, a whole bunch of other things. So there's quite a bit of integrated, intelligent transportation work that had gone on beforehand. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But even when they'd done all that work, people weren't moving out of the cars. Congestion charging was the impetus to get people out of the cars. Right. Other questions?
Is there, maybe we can talk about this later, but on the previous graphic with lots of different, for example, applications. For some of those other applications, do they follow a similar model where your smarter intervention
This one.
is kind of an incentive for people to change, or do they follow some other model?
So the incentive to change comes back to the problem you're trying to address. Okay. So let's take some examples. Let's take Glasgow as an example. Glasgow's ambition is to remove 50% of the CO2 in the city within the next 10-year period. Okay. And the city leadership chose that because they knew that other cities are going to have to do that around the world. If they do it first, they become the role model, and by doing that, they'll create businesses which will then export value and bring value back in the city. So that's one example. Right? Let's look at a very different example. Let's look at Sunderland. Right? Sunderland, their challenge is how do I create a new set of jobs given that the shipbuilders and some of the core businesses have disappeared. So I've got to drive innovation. And the challenge there was creating a platform for entrepreneurs to flourish and be more effective. And so what the city has done is actually opened up the city's administration systems to make the entrepreneurs more efficient compared to other entrepreneurs. So a very different Smarter City program. And it took us quite some time getting our head around that, but that's two different extremes. London, TfL, transportation. Brisbane, transportation. If I look at Vienna, that's a very different program. They're trying to look at how do I create jobs for the professional workers. Birmingham is trying to attract the services industries back into Birmingham and create services businesses. So how do I reconstruct the city itself to become attractive to those kind of business and retain them and so on? Well, one time. so the Birmingham Commission, there's a report which I've just finished working on. So there's a set of commissioners. We worked on this for about 6 months. And the challenge is with attracting the folk is, it's about making the place attractive. So branding is a big part of it, and I'll come back and talk about more branding in a minute. Part of it is the incentive structure, which makes it viable for people to get there, but also then the ecosystem of things around the business. So for a services organization, what does it need to have to be commercially attractive? So it doesn't just need some skills and talent, it needs to have things like the right kind of internet capabilities. Do you have the right kind of internet access? Do you have the right kind of broadband capability? Do you have the right access to professional service skills like creative skills? So the whole bunch of skills pieces and the whole bunch of infrastructure things that you need around it. And all of those need to come together. And you then tap into where the entrepreneurs are going to come from, which are often from the university. And how do you attract them at the right stage? Do you have so one of the things that Birmingham runs is the Bright Futures conference. And Bright Futures is people who are 1 or 2 years into their business come forward and try and claim a prize for being the brightest future in Birmingham. Now that as a competition drives a way of showcasing the best of the city itself. So that's part of the branding that those are some of the pieces. Yeah. Any more questions? With difficulty. So we're very fortunate because the work we've done on smarter cities, we started very much through high-level engagements, through conferences and so on, and built relationship with some of those core leaders. But at the same time, we created this thing called the Smarter Cities Challenge competition. So we put forward that we would invest the equivalent of about $1 million of IBM consulting time to a city that won Smarter Cities Challenge. And we invited city leaders to then bid for IBM resource to go work on that. Now that has two parts to it. One is it's a skilling capability for us, so we can take a set of IBM executives, work with the city and learn what the city issues are. At the same time, the cities want us to be there because that opens up funding opportunities from the government and all that kind of good thing. So they then contribute their insight into what the issues are. So bringing those two together, we were able to do about 30 of those a year, right? And that then gives us an entree into some of those kind of opportunities. So that's how we were able to scale not just the go-to-market, but also scale our skills. Because once you've had half a dozen people working on a city for 4 weeks, you suddenly get a depth of understanding in that, which you can then translate into elsewhere.
So replicating such a thing in another city would be more of a cultural challenge?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you sort of plan around that? Because domain knowledge about one city is one thing, but every city has its own.
Every city is unique. Yeah. Every city is unique. And we're quite lucky because we have a large workforce that has some of that knowledge. So you get the idea of you can do this level of transformation of the city, use the local knowledge to say this is the issue that we have, and bringing those two things together, you can then look at what the opportunity might exist in the city. And not everything's successful. We've only done 2,000 of those, so there's still a lot to go.
I'm just looking at the logic of scaling up.
Yeah.
That will live valid in a cultural, different cultural context.
You can distill down a lot of the systems down to core systems, core elements which are repeatable. Right. And if I look at, I'll come back and talk to Rio in a second. And Rio, you'll see some of the things that we're repeating. Let me talk about Coventry as a, sorry.
Sorry, I would like to know the role of technology in a country like India, like Gujarat state is especially prospering compared to the rest of the states.
Yeah.
We've seen the growth in the entrepreneur structure. We've seen many multinational companies moving to Gujarat, leaving the rest of the states in India.
Yeah.
So how has IT changed the shape of business happening in Gujarat especially?
Yeah.
What kind of innovations have happened from technology? How has technology made them smarter?
Okay, so to answer that question, I need to step back a little bit and look at a bigger picture, right? And if you look at what's happened in society in general, how has IT changed industries and how we live, right? If you look at the UK, UK's GDP today is about $2.183 trillion. 1.2% of that is agricultural work, about 23.8% is manufacturing, and the remaining is service industries. Okay, and if you dissect the service industries, and the same actually in India, if you look at the India GDP, it's about 68%, if I remember rightly, is service economy. Large chunk of it is manufacturing. Even if you look at China, which is huge manufacturing, China only hits, I think, 38% manufacturing. The rest of it is still service industries. And so if I look at what's happening in Gujarat per se, right? Gujarat, the IT industry in Gujarat is taking that service economy and through labor arbitrage is bringing work from other countries into India, whether it's in Pune, Bangalore, or yeah. But that is a temporary shift, right? What's really happening is IT is replacing the routine work that's inside the service economy. Right? So what people used to do, if you go back into the mid-50s, and you'll have seen banks have big halls of people with pens and writing the ledgers, right? They got transformed into IT systems, okay? And then gradually we built ERP systems and other systems which have gradually replaced what people do. And so work, human work, just as work in the farms moved into manufacturing, and then manufacturing work has moved into services work, that services work is moving now into technology, it's being codified into software. So the challenge is, where is the work that's going to be in the future? And there's two big roles. You can either be the people that replace the work of routine services work, and Gujarat is doing a lot of that right now. Or you can be the people that take what happens after that routine work's been transformed and create new capabilities. And that's the data scientist, the digital economy type work, data economy world. And what we see happening in other parts, so if I look at what's happening in Bangalore and Pune and in Hyderabad as another example, they're starting to grow those. The IITs are growing these skills in this new set of analytics technologies. And that's where the future economy comes. So what happens is there is a gap in the marketplace, and different parts of the city start to say, that's my value to the world. And they attack that for a period. And that value exists for a finite time. You look at any business, that value stays for a certain amount of time, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. And then gradually through competition, through commoditization, that value diminishes, and you've got to look for new value. And so different regions will look for new value. So just as China is trying to define what its new value is beyond manufacturing electronics right now, you go look at Guangdong province and you'll find they're desperately struggling to replace what they're going to do beyond silicon manufacture because they don't know right now. Right? And so each one of the industries has got to look at how it moves forward. And it's that transition from where your value is today to where the value is in the future that opens up the opportunity. And so coming back to the smarter city, if I look in Gujarat as an example, they've got a definition for a smarter city, which is we are the people who automate manual work today, right? That will have to shift in 10, 15, 20 years' time. And as it shifts, that'll open up opportunities for other regions, right? Because the anarchic entrepreneurship that sits in India will find new value. And those entrepreneurs will go to that value and start to build new businesses. Right? Make sense? So let's look at Coventry, and this is a very different example because this is about helping Coventry start to redefine their vision, because Coventry as a region, Martin Reed's a great friend of ours, and he's been working on trying to help define the vision for Coventry itself. We have a technology called JAM. We call it the innovation jams are a way in which we will engage with a large group of people on what matters to a region or what matters to an organization. We started this within IBM back in 2001 when we did a values jam to try and understand what it means to be an IBMer. And we engaged on an online conversation for 3 days with 42,000 people around the world who contributed their views on what it means to be an IBMer. And in this particular one, we worked with the city itself to ask citizens in the city, what should Coventry be famous for? And through that conversation, which again spanned 3 days, which is a full online conversation with kids, school kids, right through to grannies at home, talking about their view of what mattered to Coventry. And what we did was we identified a set of piece parts of what that vision could become. There's a whole stack of projects, 1,400 odd projects that came out of this, which then drove a set of activities to help Coventry become more competitive at the global scale. So that's a very different example from the Stockholm one, which is about transportation. That's another smarter city, but looking at it very differently. Let's look at the third example, which is Rio. Now, Rio was unfortunate in that a mudslide meant that 15,000 people lost their homes. At the same time, next year they're hosting the World Cup, and 2 years after that they're going to host the Olympics. Now, what they didn't want was a landslide or mudslide to occur, which would impact some famous people. Right? Wouldn't look too good on the newspapers around the world if that occurred. So they came to us. Actually, the mayor came to us and said, "Look, this is my challenge. How do I think? I've seen all your smarter cities arm waving stuff. What can we do here?" And we worked with them over a period to look at how do we put a structure in place which allows them to predict and effectively respond to potential disasters like this. And so we built a center. That's actually actual intelligent operations center that we built with them, and it gives them 48 hours-ish notice on potential landslides. So we do hydrological mapping of the space itself. We look at the water flows and we can figure out where there's potential landslides down at a square kilometre, and in some cases down to half a square kilometre. By predicting that, you can then use the intelligent operations, which brings together all the different parts of the emergency system, so the defence, the transportation, the energy provision, and be able to respond to potential disasters. Now, just to give you an example, the day this centre went live, if any of you have been to Rio, you'll know there's a main a bridge which kind of connects the city, the kind of arterial highway that runs through the city itself. And there was actually an accident at the bottom of that arterial highway. Normally, if an accident occurs there, then it's 45 minutes before it gets cleared. And the traffic jams that build up are just phenomenal. The traffic there is interesting in its own right. Yeah. So just to give you a feel for Rio, the traffic lights are information only, right? And so you get an interesting kind of cultural flow of traffic through the city itself. But by having this intelligent operations centre, we were able to cut down the power, get the emergency service there rapidly, and actually move the jam move the accident in 10 minutes, and so the traffic could flow. And that just gave an example of how much more efficient this whole structure was. But that brought together a number of the different agencies within the city itself to be able to respond to that set of challenges. So again, a very different kind of smarter cities example, give you another feel for it. So that's three of the examples, but really ultimately, smarter cities are about the people. A city is about people, it's not about the place. And it's what the people do that makes a city unique. And so a lot of this is to think about how you attract and retain the right talent in the city. And a lot of the attraction is about the services that the city provides. It's about the quality of life that somebody has in the city itself. You know, am I going to go there and live there because it's a nice place to live, or because my job is going to be there? You know, there's lots of different reasons. Is it a place to learn? Is it because it's got the best healthcare? Is it somewhere safe? New York has invested a tremendous amount of money to become, quotes, the safest city in the world. And that's been done through bringing together information, again, through smart city engagement type models, bringing the information from the different agencies together to transform how it becomes smarter. So the role of the local government is to understand how they use this deck of cards to create the right place to attract and retain the right talent for what their value is. And underpinning that, of course, is leveraging the right information to make better decisions, anticipating the problem. And we talked earlier about finding the right question. One of the biggest challenges I find in a lot of the city leadership is they struggle to form the right questions. And one of the things that the academic institutions can do is help form some of the right questions. And if you can help in formulating the questions in a way which are tractable, we can make tremendous progress. And then at the end of the day, it's coordinating the resources that are available to them in a way which makes them much more efficient. So that's what smarter cities helps us achieve. But it's also about image and brand. And I talked about Birmingham as an example. A lot of the work we had with Birmingham was when you come into the city itself, let's say you take the train and you come out of New Street Station, what is it you're faced with? What's the image that you're giving to any visitor to Birmingham? In the same way, as you come into Lancaster, as you come off the motorway, what is it that the city is presenting itself to people going through the city day in, day out? So that image and brand is fundamental. And unless you get that right, you struggle. And one organisation that's done this fantastically is HSBC. Any airport you come out of in the world, you walk down the gate and you'll see HSBC posters, and they've just got that sewn up right around the world. Doesn't matter which airport you go to, and that's created for them a brand and image. The second part of it is collaboration engagement, and one of the challenges that I see time and time again in the cities is that the leadership sits in their civic enterprise, civic halls, and their ability to openly engage with the citizens is very much restricted. And with this day and age of social media and those kind of things, that collaboration engagement is kind of fundamental to success. And ultimately, it's making shrewd investment decisions. So the city leadership has a tremendous amount of funding opportunities that they have. Trying to make the right decisions opens up a set of challenges. So making this making right decisions in these three areas, I think, makes a big difference to a smart city program. So you'd be pleased to know this is my last slide, and we can open up for some more questions. But ultimately, this is about economic value. Cities will only be valuable if they have some kind of economic value that underpins that, because otherwise they're not sustainable. In the society today, whether we like it or not, money forms the primary economic value for the city itself. So you've got to think about the individual, and is their individual going to have sufficient wealth to be able to live in the way that they want to live? Because if they don't, then that gives us a whole set of challenges. Because we're not in a world where there is other ways of measuring value which allows us to live. Right? Think about global. So it's being unique and appropriate to each individual. It's about having global value, which is recognizable on the global landscape, because each city is competing on a global scale. It's about being frugal, so not being wasteful. It's doing things that are sustainable, and ultimately creating that sort of fertile ground for enterprises to really drive their economic value and thrive and deliver value back into the city. So that makes some kind of sense. I know you squirmed at some of the points there. So.
I'm just wondering what it helps me if I live in a very polluted city that I have enough money. Like the whole uncertainty part, like the uncertainty that we're faced with today is to a large extent something that we can't really buy our way out of, or kind of make cities with a bubble over as they suggested in the 60s.
Yeah, no. So if I look at, for example, what Glasgow's doing, it comes back to what matters to the individual. You've got a set of issues. Which one of the issues is the one that you can most tackle, which will have a tangible impact on as many citizens as possible? That's what you've got to really focus on. But ultimately, as you say, if you're living in a polluted space and the going to be sick, they're not going to be able to deliver value. There's a direct, commercial impact of not having the right environment for individuals as well. These things are all interconnected. You've got to unpack these. There's no easy decisions in this, for sure.
Then, how do you come in like developing countries where their problem is not about maybe having a good transportation system in places where people are, looking for water to drink, there's electricity, and have so many problems like healthcare and so on?
Yeah, so we're doing tremendous amount of work, for example, in Africa, right? So a tremendous amount of work there. And it's amazing how much innovation you can have. So for example, this notion of an electric hut which is powered by solar power, which powers, which charges a set of batteries, which then allows you to take batteries with months worth of power supply to power a light and a mobile phone is an example. So we're looking at innovative ways of providing energy, right? At the same time, that can be used to then desalinate some of the water and create fresh water. Doesn't solve everything, but you've got to do things piece at a time. So there are things that are happening. The innovation in Africa is just phenomenal, and I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of this stuff. If I look in China, some of the growing cities in China, they're growing out of nowhere. Some of the mega cities that they're being built on these kind of models, looking at the efficiency across all of the different systems. It's breathtaking. But at the same time, they're also very clinical, and they're not necessarily providing the individual. So they might be attacking these things, but they're not tackling the individual. And so you've got to really be very balanced in that. Masdar was a good example of a city that was trying to do something very different And again, Masdar hit a whole bunch of roadblocks because of their affordability of their ambitions. They had a very big ambition, which was to become the zero carbon city. But when they tried to actually execute that, they found it was much more expensive. It was just not affordable. So they had to back off some of those things. So some ambitions become too far, too unattainable, if you like. We've got to back off. Yeah. Sorry.
I just wanted to know, you have talked about smarter cities, but is there any, they're going to be holding the World Cup of football and Olympics as well. There will be a lot of people traveling there. So have they looked at how to make their communication infrastructure smarter? Because when there are a lot of people there, they need to have a different communication infrastructure. And and they also need to consider how much carbon footprint it's gonna generate. So are they looking at that side as well? Or?
So on the communication side, they've done a tremendous amount of work. They've been working with a number of communication providers to try and address some of those issues. So they're putting a range of temporary communications for actually, satellites, a whole bunch of things to try and do that. So I think they've got that largely covered. The carbon footprint impact is a difficult one, right? They can't address that. There is no other way to get to Rio without flying there, right? And that's very expensive on carbon footprint. So are they trying to address some of that? Yes, they are at the city itself. So they're trying to move people from cars to other forms of transportation, electric, like everybody else. They're trying to do things. Do they have all the answers? Then obviously not. Right? Yeah.
It's another term, ubiquitous city. So is there any difference between smarter city and ubiquitous city?
So ubiquitous city is one, again, it's not very well defined. So you try and unpack that and you get different aspects. So depending on who you ask, you get a different view on what a ubiquitous city is.
There is a term ubiquitous city in South Korea.
Yes.
And they are planning a city which is very advanced, where there is everywhere there is ambient intelligence.
Yeah.
As far as the buildings are concerned,
Yeah.
as far as the traffic is concerned,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
is there any difference between a smarter city and ubiquitous city? Or
So the focus on that particular ubiquitous city is about providing information to the individual to optimize the individual's interaction with the city itself, right? What they're not trying to do, in what we're trying to do here, is look at the systems of systems. So they're not trying to look at how do we bring everything together and optimize the systems of systems. They're assuming that you as an individual will optimize everything that happens and that will make everything better. Time will tell whether that works or not. We don't know. Yeah, there is a lot of overlap, obviously. They're all information based. They're all about providing information. It's how and where the information decisions about the information made, I think, are different. Right.
When looking at implementing projects, are you typically driving it from the centre out, or trying to bring individuals in to collaborate to implement whatever the solution is you're looking to solve? In many ways, it's easier conceptually to view a system imposed from the centre, particularly in a civic implementation of
Yeah.
the city.
Yeah.
But certainly here, people are distrustful of that centre out, and maybe it's got to be different in other places. But how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, you raise a really important point around trust. Part of the reason we did the Coventry project was to rebuild trust between the city leadership and the citizens, because there was that distrust that existed. Usually the engagement is top down and bottom up. Right? So we come top down and form some of the hypotheses and challenges, and you engage bottom up to make them doable, executable, trusted, and so on. Yes, they do. That does happen, but that's welcome to the world. And you've got to try and rationalize that as you uncover. As I said, this is a journey, and the journey, every step you make on the journey, you learn something new. So if you engage at the top and you start with the smarter city journey from the top, you'll make some steps and you realize actually that doesn't work. So when you start at the bottom, you make some journey, you say some of those don't work, and then you've got to try and bring the two together. Yes, yeah. So if I look at China, that's much easier to execute top down. If I look at India, it's very much easier to work bottom up. If I look at US, it's difficult to work there, period. But
Curious about the data. If you can say something about all the data that's being produced, because you have very different. You must build very different systems. Like I work with smart grid, and in Denmark, it's not a big problem
Right.
that the government has access to all data, but you never see that in Germany, for example. So I don't
yeah. So you're on a very important question, which is the whole privacy and ethics of the data. And what we're doing a lot of right now is trying to form some rules around ethics. So what do you know about the provenance? So just because you've got some data, is it real data, right? And how do you know the provenance of the data itself? What is appropriate use of the data in that context? How do you build contracts? So for example, one of the things that we're doing is opting in as a model for accessing data. Healthcare is a good example. If you can opt into access to if I was to share my healthcare record with the doctors, would that help them do the research better? Yes, it would. But by opting in, I'm expecting to get a better healthcare service on the back of it. So thinking about how the data is accessed, created, becomes a big challenge. Dublin is one of our research centres, and what Dublin City has done is opened up a lot of the city data to our researchers. And there is a huge challenge there because we have to keep it anonymized. You can't get to person. You can't break personal privacies from that perspective. And so a lot of the work has been around anonymization and aggregation of data. So we don't break those. But that's a big topic and a big research area that's still progressing. So I don't have any easy answers for you. If you do have them, please tell me. Right.
Is there a certain scale to projects you actually define as this threshold, or when actually IBM can come and do work?
It comes down to, for us, affordability, right? There's a cost for us to engage with the city, and unless we can see commercial value, then we wouldn't engage.
Is there a certain size of the project, maybe?
It's
What you need to work with? It seems that's probably difficult maybe to work with particular local community. It seems to.
Well, to give you a scale, we're working with rural communities actually in part of Gujarat, which is a very poor area within Gujarat itself. And there we're working with a number of small villages where each village is about 20 or 30 inhabitants. So those are very small projects. And we've got a team working on how we redefine the smarter rural landscape as one example. In Africa, we're working with very small teams. So in some spaces we are. Most of our major market projects tend to be with the bigger cities for obvious reasons. Yeah, that's where we can add most value. But this is it's not just IBM, there's lots of other people working in this space as well. We're working with Cisco and Siemens and all those guys as well. But I can't give you is a project, half 50p, 100p, we don't have that. We have to look at each one on case by case and decide what's the value that we can bring to that. What's the issue that the city's trying to solve? Is that an issue that we think exists elsewhere? And by learning that issue, can we leverage that in knowledge elsewhere? Is there sufficient investment to be able to make something happen? And do we have the inspiring leader that can really have something happen? Because if those three things aren't in place, then we're not going to make progress. And even if they spend money, we're not going to get value. There's no point for us or them. Right. Okay, I'm just conscious of time because I've got to get a plane in a few, not long, so far away. Last question.
I just wondered if you could unpack the sustainable element for us. What is it that IBM Smart Cities are referring to?
So sustainability for us is about a whole bunch of things. So it's about sustainable economy. Do you have an economic model that's sustainable? Do you make sustainable use of the resources that you have within the city itself? So if you take a region that's rich in oil or other natural things, are you making sustainable use of that? And then sustainability from a carbon and the kind of environmental perspective. Is it sustainable? Are you destroying your environment in a way that city is not going to be sustainable in the future? So it's a very broad definition, and it's intentionally broad because it does depend on what we're trying to do there. Okay, I'm just going to say it's time to close, I think.